If you've been online recently, you've probably heard the term walkable cities, which refers to cities where you can walk places. Now, to anyone not living in North America, this probably sounds stupid because in most of the world, people walk to do their daily business all the time. But in most of the US and Canada, almost nobody walks anywhere apart from a few exceptions. Cars are a necessity, and without one, you basically can't live your life. So, what's the difference?
Walkable cities is a dog whistle for fat phobia.
No, it's fucking not.
I know it may be hard for OP to believe, but as a fat person I don't actually want to be hit by a car while fatly going about my fat day.
Instead you fatly go about your fat day in a dystopian hellhole while being fat.
How are walkable cities a dystopia?
Communism is a dystopia.
If you live in any US or Canadian city, you've probably heard people say,
"Our country is too big for walkable cities."
Look, we all know Canada and the US are the second and fourth largest countries in the world, but most people live in cities and they don't travel that far on a regular basis. In America, 38% of all vehicle trips are 3 miles or less, which is 5 kilometers. That's a distance you can easily make by walking or cycling. It's also funny when you consider that almost every American and Canadian city used to be walkable and connected by rapid transit, as most of these places were built before cars. So when people bring up the size of the country and how everything is too far apart, what they're really talking about is land use. Land use is the fundamental factor that determines how walkable your city is. Of course, there's other factors like safety and good placemaking, which I'll talk about in future videos, but for those to truly work, your city still needs the right bones. According to Marchetti's constant, the average person spends about 1 hour traveling or commuting each day, and this number has remained the same for centuries. Even when new technology was invented that let us travel faster, that number still roughly stayed the same, as more speed means more distance you can travel and thus the further away you can live and work. Trams and streetcars, for example, allowed us to expand our cities much further out and build streetcar suburbs. But since you still had to walk to a streetcar stop, these places were still designed to be dense and walkable. But then cars came along, and this changed everything because not only were they very fast, but they also allowed you to drive straight to your destination. This meant that people basically didn't need to walk anymore apart from leaving your front door and walking to your driveway. And so we started spreading our cities much further out and designed neighborhoods as if humans don't have feet. In a traditional neighborhood, buildings were allowed to be mixed use. For example, corner stores were built within residential neighborhoods, creating a sense of community and allowing people to access basic needs on foot. You can still find this in older suburbs in North America, but this has pretty much been the standard way of building things in every city around the world for centuries. But after the Second World War, American planners decided that corner stores are bad for neighborhoods, and so they separated every type of land use with Euclidean zoning. This meant that land zoned for residential could only have homes, and land zoned for commercial could only have shops. As a result, people had to depend on a car to do anything. But this also restricted the type of housing you can build, making it illegal to build anything other than single-family detached homes within residential areas. You can't even build a duplex or a small apartment, even if there's demand for more housing. This puts so much pressure to build on a few remaining areas that do allow higher density, leading to the common situation of single-family homes right next to giant skyscrapers with nothing in between. This is called the missing middle, which refers to the lack of mid-rise buildings commonly found all over Europe and Asia. Streets in older neighborhoods were also laid out in a connected grid with frequent intersections, allowing people walking to take the most direct route. But streets in suburbia are made up of cul-de-sacs that are disconnected from each other, so even if you are technically close to some sort of shop or amenity, you still have to take a long circuitous route, and it's always going to be faster to drive. One extreme example is this suburb in Orlando, Florida, where two houses that share the same backyard fence are a 2.5-hour walk apart. So now that people are dependent on cars, there needs to be space to store all those cars. That's where parking minimums comes in, which are laws that force every building to provide a certain amount of free parking, whether or not they need it. The problem is, no one knew how to determine the exact number of parking spaces each building should provide, So planners literally just guessed. This resulted in way more parking than cities actually needed. In America, there's an estimated 8 parking spaces for every single car. This guarantees car-dependent sprawl because it forces every building to take up significantly more land, leaving less space for actual destinations. These laws even apply to downtown, so if a developer wanted to build a new apartment, they would have to buy up all the buildings next to them and turn them into parking lots. That includes historical buildings and small businesses. Now, these days, many North American cities have gotten rid of their parking requirements and some have made progress on zoning. But the sheer amount of damage done by these policies still persists today. For example, bars and stadiums also had to be separated from residential areas and provide absurd amounts of parking, which contributes to the high rates of impaired driving in North America. Look, you might say people should just be more responsible and not drink and drive, but, maybe places that serve alcohol should not be only accessible by car? When your city spreads too far apart, it also becomes less efficient as you lose the inherent benefits of being close to things. For example, you'll often hear North Americans complain about how their city is full. Here in Toronto, people often blame the terrible traffic congestion on the high population growth, claiming that the city can't take any more people. In Atlanta, Georgia, the slogan, "We full," has been promoted to discourage people from moving to the city because, look at all this traffic. But here's the size of Atlanta compared to Barcelona. Somehow, Atlanta is at full capacity despite having a similar population, but a land area over 20 times bigger. This is a city where 86% of commute trips are made by car, while only 5% are made by walking, cycling, and public transit. Meanwhile, here's Barcelona. Like most American cities, Atlanta was not built this way. But during the 20th century, urban renewal and highway expansion projects destroyed the old walkable neighborhoods and replaced them with sprawling suburbs. Zoning and parking lots were introduced, roads were widened, and highways were plowed through the downtown. So when the vast majority of people in your city have to drive for every trip with no alternatives, it's easy to think that your city is full, when in reality your city's capacity is limited by the number of cars that can fit on a highway. Bad land use is also one of the biggest reasons why public transit sucks in most of America, because every trip made by transit is also a walking or cycling trip. Far too often, North American cities will build new transit lines in the suburbs, but the area surrounding the stations are still the same low-density car-dependent sprawl. This leads to the last mile problem, which refers to that extra distance between a transit station and your final destination. When people get off here, where do they go? Here's a typical suburban train station in Canada's largest city. It's surrounded by a parking lot, a self-storage facility, and an abandoned building. Since it's only accessible by roads, you would have to walk a long circuitous route in order to go to and from the station. The opposite is really common as well. North American cities will build new mixed-use walkable neighborhoods in the suburbs, but then they don't build any transit, at least not right away. As a result, people living here have to drive if they want to visit other parts of the city, which kinda defeats the whole purpose of building walkable places. As people move in, they will set up their entire lives around driving, and afterwards, it's nearly impossible to go back and undo the damage by adding transit later. Instead, when you build for transit first instead of after, people will build their lives around walking, cycling, and public transit, and you're able to grow your city without needing to accommodate cars. Here in Toronto, the city is currently undergoing a humongous redevelopment of its eastern waterfront. A huge part of this is the Portlands, which is currently just an industrial wasteland, but it's being transformed into a brand new master-planned high-density walkable neighborhood. It's also planned to have a new streetcar line to connect it with the city, which is why there's 2 bridges here. One for transit and one for other vehicles. But so far, this streetcar hasn't been funded yet because, well, the city doesn't have enough money and the province, well, yeah. If the new streetcar doesn't get built before the rest of the Portlands project gets completed, It'll not only be way more expensive to go back and add transit later, but all these new residents moving in will get used to driving, especially when there's an elevated highway right there. In comparison, here's the island of Eiberg in Amsterdam. Just like the Portlands in Toronto, Eiberg was a new high-density residential development built on a piece of reclaimed land next to the water. It also had a tram, connecting it to the city. The difference is, the new tram line was built before the rest of the project was completed, giving residents immediate access to high-quality public transit as they were moving in. This ensures that people living here build their lives around walking, cycling, and public transit, reducing the amount of car traffic in the city. Eiberg is not unique at all. This is how neighborhoods were always built in the past, and it's how new neighborhoods should be built as well. You create a new transit line, build a town center around the station, then surround that with neighborhoods, making sure everyone lives within walking or cycling distance from the center. Bonus points if you lay the streets out in a way so that people walking or cycling can take the most direct routes, while drivers have to go the long way. This ensures that walking, cycling, and transit are the most convenient ways to get around, unlike the North American method of building sprawling suburbs in the middle of nowhere, making driving the only option available. Nick Laporte has a great video showing this being done in the Netherlands, which I highly recommend watching because it will blow your mind just how well designed these places are. This level of land use planning is probably too advanced for North American cities, but what they can still do is build on the places that already exist, building more rapid transit and rezoning the area around stations for high-density mixed-use neighborhoods. This is called transit-oriented development. A great example is the city of North York, which is actually just part of Toronto, but it used to be its own city. In the 1970s, Toronto wanted to create a new transit-oriented mixed-use district in the suburbs, and this area was chosen because it had a subway running right under it and a highway to the south. So this area, which was once a typical suburban strode, got redeveloped into a residential office employment center. A new subway station was also added in between the two existing ones. And from 1986 to 2001, subway ridership increased by 84%, and car ownership decreased by 16%. North York Centre has literally become the busiest business district in Toronto outside of downtown, and it's so successful that the city now wants to expand this area further east to allow more medium-density neighborhoods. This is what it looks like when you combine good land use planning with good transit planning. People often say that everyone just prefers living in suburbia, but even if you like these places, which is totally fine, why should everyone else live like this as well? If this is what everyone wants, why do we need these strict laws that make it illegal to build anything else? The truth is, many surveys have shown that at least half of all Americans would prefer walkable neighborhoods, but usually less than a quarter of the residential land in our cities is anything other than car-dependent suburbs. That's why the few walkable neighborhoods that do exist are some of the most expensive places to live. Because, as it turns out, people just like living in cities where you can walk places.